With the Mercedes CLK-LM being the subject of a previous review on the channel, of course it was only a matter of time before we featured another returning premium upgrade, which of course did not used to have an interior, a car which debuted in Gran Turismo 4, and a car which was in a completely different dealership, or under a completely different manufacturer at least to what you'd expect, BMW, and which was, if I recall correctly, one of the slightly more difficult cars to win back in Gran Turismo 4. Then in later games like GT6 you could just buy it in a normal way, and now you can buy it again technically, but for a lot more cash, and it is of course the McLaren F1 Longtail GTR. Possibly the most coveted example of the McLaren F1, even more so in the GT road-going version, of which there were only ever a couple made. And within the game, just like the CLK-LM, this is a car that is in a Hagerty dealership. So expense is the name of the game at 10 million credits, at least that's the price it was when I purchased it, and of course being Hagerty's it can go up and down. In terms of specs then and performance, the question is, how does, first and foremost, this compare to something like a CLK-LM, but also in the broader scheme of things, what is this car like? Because I recall this very vividly in the GT4 days being a good car, but not necessarily worthy of being some super secret unlock only kind of vehicle. It was good, but it wasn't necessarily any better than something like a CLK-LM at the time, or even something like a Pajamas. It would have been better, but not better in a ridiculous kind of way. So what's it like now? Well, it's a Group 2 category vehicle, such as the Mercedes is, 841 points, which isn't crazy high, but again it compares pretty well to something like a CLK-LM, which is 830, so in other words this is 11 points higher than that. It has 602 horsepower, and the weight is very good at 950 kilos, so not that much more than a modern LMP car, for example, like an LMP1. Of course, mid-engine, rear-wheel drive, naturally aspirated. Now, the interesting thing about how this car compares to the Mercedes in particular is that they have two very different approaches to the overall handling profile, the signature as I like to call it. The CLK-LM, as I talked about in that review, feels almost like a really high-end touring car. It's smooth, it's very easy to drive, super low stress, very low effort, and has a really nice torquey, overall long distance kind of feel to it. The McLaren is not like that. The McLaren is not difficult to drive, but it's much more twitchy, much more precise, I would say, and it feels more like what you'd expect something like a GT1 to be like, or even something like a Group C car, which came before them, or even an LMP car or an LMP 900 that of course succeeded the GT1 category, at least in this kind of top tier Le Mans form. So in terms of using this thing, what it feels like in practice, well, it's fantastic, put simply. It's properly quick. You will often see in events where this is an AI vehicle, for example, it will tend to have at least one or two at the front of the grid. And they'll stay at the front of the grid until you catch them, because they are properly quick and very good. In fact, it has an interesting advantage over the Mercedes in particular when it comes to that handling, because with that difference between like the smooth, easygoing handling of the Mercedes to the sharper, twitchier, more prototype level handling of this one, it does mean that the Mercedes feels more dated in a certain kind of way. It's not bad, but it certainly doesn't feel as fast as this does. It feels to me at least like the Mercedes reaches its limits within a fairly short amount of time. In other words, you'll learn how to use the Mercedes fairly quickly. With the McLaren, I feel like this car, you'll get up around 80%, maybe even 90% of what it can do within a couple of laps. You'll get a good feel for it. But then to really push it up to the top tier echelons of what it's capable of, it takes a little bit longer, because it's a very rewarding car. Not necessarily a difficult one to drive, but as Kaz himself has said, it's not difficult to drive a car. It's more difficult to drive a car very quickly, or very well. The McLaren is a prime example of that. It's easy to drive it, that's one of the good things about it, but driving it to its limit, really unlocking the full potential, that's where more time, more skill comes in. Is it a rewarding car? I would absolutely say yes. I like this one way more than the short-tail GTR that we already had in the previous couple of games, and to me, it certainly is a car that is worthy of a huge price. It does deserve a big price. 10 million is, in my opinion, a bit excessive though. especially in comparison to something like the Mercedes, which when I purchased that was also a very high $6.5 million. I'm not saying that they're not going to cost something like that in real life. I've no doubt that they easily could. What I am saying though is that could be a little bit too much within the world of a game, especially given that's like 4 times the price of something like a Mazda 787B, which, let's be honest, that's kind of crazy. Ultimately, that's it for my thoughts on the Longtail though. Definitely a car that's worth looking into, and aside from that, there's not much else to say. It's just a really good car. So, give me your thoughts down below in the comments. For those curious, I will be doing a gameplay video in the coming days where you can just hear the car on its own with no commentary, different livery, different circuit. So of course, check that out if you are sticking around on the channel, and until then, I'll see you next time. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.